In this video, we're going to go through items that everybody's going to want to have for 2024. I did one of these for the end of last year, preparing for 2023, and it turns out people found that video very useful, so we'll make one for 2024. This video will contain completely different items than I mentioned in the last one. Nothing will overlap. However, there is still super useful things in that video, so I will link it in the description and you can check that one out as well to make sure you also have those things ticked off too. With that being said, let's get started. So we're going to start out with something pretty simple. That is going to be necromancy combat gear. I would probably aim to have like tier 90 necromancy combat gear anyway, whether you prefer to use magic, melee or ranged, because it's pretty cheap to get. Honestly, leveling up your necromancy, let's just be honest, it's the way of the future at the moment. Right now it is the complete meta in terms of combat, and yes, there is the combat beta coming through, which will hopefully bring the other three styles into relevancy again. But at the same time, they've just released necromancy. They're not going to bring it to a point where necromancy isn't really the strongest, in my opinion. I can't see them doing that, because imagine they spend all this time making something and then it's like use or how many people are interacting with it drops down below all the stuff that's been out for years. It's not going to be something they'll do. So grabbing hold of tier 90 necromancy gear, which really isn't that hard because you get it through the quests and you craft it. It costs like between 50 and 100 mil in total. It may even be less than 50 mil in total, honestly. Perking it out and stuff is going to take a little bit of extra coins too, so it's not all that much to work towards. Having this though is going to put you in a good position for future updates and stuff, because when it releases, if it's best in slot, if it's like the meta towards it, you're pretty much prepared. So I'd definitely put this on your list if you haven't already acquired it. Next up is something that you should just always have anyway, and it's something that is super useful, but I didn't mention it in the last year, so here it is. Scavenging for gear. The Scav 4 perk, or Scavenging 4 perk, is something that will allow you to actually get invention components when you kill something. So the actual tooltip of it reads, it'll provide a 1% chance per rank to get an uncommon invention component as a drop from combat, with a 1% chance that it will be a rare component instead. So for you guys that are leveling up Slayer, or you're AFKing for combat XP, or maybe you're just doing like an AFK moneymaker which makes you kill many different things, maybe you're even doing Turoffs to get some farming XP, you should grab Scav 4 and put it on one of your armor pieces, because it's going to give you the chance to get yourself some invention components, which let's be fair, these are expensive and they can be very expensive. Some of them can be really difficult to get as well and a pain in the ass, and so having them through this can save you a lot of GP and a lot of time. For example, you can get noxious components from this. Noxious. You can also get the Ulajankan ones, and I wasn't just on a glitch and it didn't loop there. I don't know how to pronounce that crap, but the ones for Aftershock, you can get those, save yourself a lot of money. So if you are doing Slayer, you're leveling up anything, AFKing anything, maybe consider putting Scav 4 on your actual gear. Next up is a ring that I would have discounted before necromancy, but the Ring of Death. The Ring of Death, it's been changed. It's been changed. It doesn't necessarily just bring you back to life anymore. When you die, you will stay in the instance. Now, when looking at like melee, magic, and ranged, you have best in slot rings that are definitely worth doing because they give you effects. Necromancy is yet to actually get a ring that has a specific effect for necromancy. But the Ring of Death is super useful in places like the elite dungeons, because as you go through those dungeons with necromancy, your adrenaline use is just slightly too high to be consistent on clearing through some certain rooms. For example, using the scythe for the AoE can be slightly too much adrenaline each time you do this, but the Ring of Death is going to refund some adrenaline whenever you kill something. You have a 50% chance of getting some adrenaline back, and so if you're clearing off big groups of mobs, which you are going to be doing in dungeons, you end up getting back that little bit of difference adrenaline that makes it a nice smooth flow to get through those dungeons. Not only that, in some places the Ring of Death actually does become best in slot for necromancy if your actual accuracy isn't maxed out. Of course, you can then affect this with other things that will increase your accuracy, but if you're not in a position to do this, then it is still a good ring to have. Not to mention, the Ring of Death is quickly becoming my favorite ring to use, even if I am losing a bit of DPS, because for example, you're trying to kill Masuta and you die right towards the end. You got to redo that whole fight, and it's time gated and it's a freaking pain in the ass. If you have the Ring of Death, you can use things like Reflect and Debilitate and Devotion and just go defensive crazy and just eat through, and you're not immediately dead. You can try and get through the end of that kill. If you're right at the end and you die to something like a stupid mistake, you can still finish the kill off and not have to get punished and redo the whole thing. It's one of my favorite rings right now, and I use it for a lot of stuff. even if it's not best in slot. Now this is the one item that actually overlaps with the last list that I'll link in the description, and that is the Zuk Capes. The reason I'm re-mentioning this is because of course we now have the Necromancy Cape as well. Zuk Capes are insanely good for PvM. There's no denying that these are obviously the best in slot capes in the game. They are for stats wise as well as for actual effects, but the effects that come with them are too valuable not to have, and they change PvM in a massive way, especially with Necromancy. Using the Death Skulls ability without the Zuk Cape is a massively different experience than using it with the Zuk Cape. Without it, you are going to be using 100% adrenaline to cast Death Skulls, so it becomes really difficult to use very often. With it, it's only 60%, and that's a massive difference in actual adrenaline use. You're going to be able to use it way more, but not only does it affect the adrenaline cost, it increases the amount of bounces, so overall increasing the amount of damage you get from it as well. It's cheaper to use, does more damage, and it becomes your bread and butter of necromancy as you try and do damage. So grabbing that as a necromancer and every other combat style as well is absolutely worth it. Next up is another skilling item, and that is the Brooch of the Gods. The Brooch of the Gods is a item that you'll put in your pocket slot, and you'll use it to get a few different benefits while skilling. For example, portable skilling stations effects are going to be twice as likely to trigger. So when you're saving like materials from using the Herblore skilling station, you will actually be able to double that as well, which is super useful. Every now and again, you'll also have a divine blessing appear nearby, which is very similar to the Seren spirits, if you know what those are, which we're going to get to soon, which will, when you capture it or you click on it, you will get invention components given to you as well. Not to mention, you can also store decorated urns inside of it as well. The wiki also states that certain actions while training certain skills have experience increased by 20% or receive an increase in effectiveness. So this thing gives a lot of benefits and is definitely something for someone who is working on skilling and going towards max maybe, or you just enjoy doing skilling in the background, something that you probably want to add to your bank. Something that's become very high in demand and very useful since Necromancy's launch, again Necromancy, who would have guessed, but this is valid for all combat styles, not just Necromancy, is the Salve Amulet E and the Undead Slayer perks and ability codex. So basically anything that increases your damage to the undead. Salve Amulet, Undead perk on your invention, and the Undead Slayer ability. These are in high demand right now because with the theme of Necromancy, everything that you're fighting, it's good against. They're all undead, like Raziel's an undead necromancer, Vorkath is an undead dragon, and anything they release in the future may still be themed around this necromancy thing. And so even though this may not be something to obsess over immediately and be like, I really need to get this because in it said the next release is going to be useful on, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a good chance that these will have more valuable use in the future than the other ones that give the same sort of thing, like the Dragon Slayer perk and whatnot. So it definitely may be worth grabbing these, but also even if there's nothing else released in the future, there's still Raziel, there's still going through and leveling up necromancy, there's still many other uses that these are useful for, so there's still something to put on your shopping list. Back to another skilling item, we're going to talk about the Grace of the Elves. Now the Grace of the Elves is a super useful item because it offers many different benefits, kind of like the brooch that we just talked about. One of which is that you are able to store up to 500 charges of Signs of the Porter in the necklace. What this means is when you're doing certain gathering skills, the items will be immediately transported to your bank, and you can put 500 charges in this. It can also be upgraded to increase this, but 500 for the base version. Also similar to the brooch, while skilling and doing certain gathering skills, you will notice that a Seren spirit will pop up every now and again. And when the Seren spirit pops up, you get to click on it and you can get yourself an item from the rare drop table. So you can get yourself extra GP while skilling as well. It's worth mentioning as well that if you have tier 4 luck, so a Luck of the Dwarves or a Hazelmere's Signet Ring, you can actually have access to the Hazelmere's Signet Ring from the drop table. So it could be something that makes you insanely rich. I wouldn't count on it. It's going to be super rare, but it does happen, of course. And I mean, either way, it's going to give you more GP along the way anyway, and you have the chance of getting that stupidly expensive item. Other effects is while you have this equipped, some certain Seren prayers will have the prayer drain rate halved, which is obviously super useful for certain situations. And one of my favorite things for this is you can have access to the max guild teleport portals, which you can access directly from the Grace of the Elves, so you no longer have to travel to them. These can allow you to travel to places like the Invention Guild, or have a quick easy access to get to your traveling merchant so you can get things each and every day as well. It's just super convenient. I use this a lot for the max portals totals, and so even for that alone, it's kind of worth grabbing. Another new release item is going to be the Nexus for necromancy. This is basically a rune pouch for magic, but for necromancy. The reason I'm even mentioning this is this video is mostly for people starting the game again or picking it back up, and maybe some of you guys started during necromancy when it launched, or you came like returned to the game, and then you took a break afterwards, and now you're coming back to it again at some point this year. It is definitely worth knowing that you can have a Nexus for necromancy resources, runes, and the ectoplasms, and you can actually store everything in here with no cap on it either. There's two different versions right now, one that you can craft at level 60, and then another one that you get for defeating Vorkath 100 times. Once you've done that, you'll get Zamoragul's Nexus, and this will give you a little passive effect that's going to give you plus 15 levels to Bone Shield. So this is probably worth grabbing for anybody anyway. If you already have the tier 60 one and you don't have the Zamoragul one, 15 levels in your shield is actually pretty useful. It affects how much your resonance is going to heal, how long barricade lasts, and many other things as well. Another item that I feel is becoming more of a necessity thing, like something that is moving up the priority list, is the double surge and the double escape codex, but specifically the double surge one. This is becoming more useful as new content releases. I guess Jagex is probably weighing it into their decisions of when they actually release content, going, well, people have double surge, so maybe we should make this area a little bit bigger or this a bit more useful here and there. Whether it's on accident or not, this is becoming a lot more useful, I suppose you would say. For example, in the Vorkath release, you have the option in normal mode to travel to different points of interest to shut them down and then go into the kill with either less mechanics or ignore them and then have more mechanics. But the distance between each location is actually pretty decent, so having the double surge available to you saves a hell of a lot of time in this content. Without it, you're going to be spending a lot more time traveling from point 1 to point 2, or even just ignoring them and traveling from the entrance to the actual final point to start the fight. And in comparison, if you did have it, obviously if you had it, you can travel a lot quicker, and so it saves you a lot of time. It's also become super valuable in a lot of boss fights as well, so this is definitely something that if you don't have, or you've been putting up with not having, something to add to your list to work towards. Another thing for returning players to consider, or newer players as well, is if you're focusing on skilling and leveling up your skills, we now have in game, since a year or two ago, skilling offhands that are definitely worth taking a look at. Say someone's returning to the game from 5-6 years ago, you're not even going to think about these because they're all new releases, and if I was going to start up a new account personally even, I would probably forget about these until I was like, oh wait, I could have used that the whole way through. Frick, man. So we have the Artificer's Measure, which is for crafting and construction, the Orthan Furnace Core, which is for fire making and smithing, the Tagger's Core Hammer for mining, and the Sanna's Fry Torch for woodcutting. I'm not going to spend time going into detail on every single one of them, but I'm just going to say that if you guys are looking at these skills, then maybe just have a look on the wiki, see if they're beneficial to you, whether they're worth the GB investment, and then of course decide from there. For many people, these are going to have a lot of benefits that you want, so definitely don't forget about them. For this one, we're going to move back to something related to PVM. That is going to be the Conservation of Energy Relic. Now this is more of an unlock rather than an item, but you need an item to be able to unlock it, so maybe you guys will let me off, but either way, I figured it was worth mentioning because this changes the PVM experience a hell of a lot, because it's going to save you a lot of adrenaline whenever you use ultimates. This makes a big difference to your actual DPS rotations if you have it active, and will increase the amount of damage you can output by a dramatic amount. It is a big noticeable thing, even just having that extra 10% mixed with your Ring of Vigor passives and all that sort of stuff, which was mentioned in the previous video. This is something that I got recently, and it is absolutely worth it. If you haven't got this yet and you're maybe looking at the grind thinking that is a long grind, level 110 archaeology, if you are wanting to take PVM seriously, it is definitely something to add to your list of goals to work towards. So that does bring us to the end of this list for this year. There's many items in the game, and I'm sure you guys are thinking, Ennett, what about this item? What about that item? Maybe that was in the previous video, so check that out as well. But also, there's going to be many different items. I tried to include some skilling stuff in here and some combat stuff. Let's be honest, I usually only really cover combat stuff because I just PVM in this game, but I wanted to include some stuff that balances it for all players rather than just people who want to do PVM. That being said, these are also not in any sort of priority order. It's just items that are worth considering depending on where you're at in the game. So you'll have to consider, is this worth getting now or should I get it later? And then these are just items that are going to have value to you at some point down the line. But other than that, I hope this video was useful, and I will, like I say, link the other one in the description, so check that out. With that being said, I'll catch you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.